Welcome to Todd Talks, where my guests today are Bob Darden and Stephen Newby. Delighted that the two of you could join us.
Wouldn't have missed it.
It's great to be here.
So glad you're here. These are dear friends, and as it happens, they're dear friends one with another. So let's hear how the two of you all met. How did the two of you all get connected?
Bobby, why don't you start?
Stephen and I had been running in some of the same Black gospel circles, different conferences through the years. I think primarily the one Jimmy Abington did in Michigan, and just immediately made a connection. And then when we started doing the Pruitt Memorial Symposia here at Baylor, and we were looking for people for the first few, Stephen naturally came to mind. But in my opinion, where we really bonded was at the first big Pruitt Symposium at the then new McLean Stadium.
Yes.
Stephen was presenting a presentation on Andre Crouch's Just Andre album, which he compared to the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band of gospel music.
Wow. I'm sure you're going to enjoy the show.
And I was sitting next to my then publisher at Penn State University, Patrick Alexander, and we looked at each other midway through it and said, "That's a book." And Steve, "That's a book." And he said, "Why don't you look into that?" And
more about the book later, but
that's how we.
So the ellipsis is there. Is that kind of what you remember?
Yeah, it's what I remembered. And then I invited Bob out to Seattle. We're at Seattle Pacific University. We had a gospel fest. We had him. We published some of his works in a nice, beautiful, glowing, full-color brochure. He gave a wonderful synopsis of the gospel music history. And then we had Tremaine Hawkins there,
Wow.
Raymond White. There were a lot of great people at that gospel fest, a choir of about, well, it had to have been about 500 people, one of those events. And so he was narrating, and I just liked working with him because he just, his disposition, is great guy, very funny.
Yes.
Takes himself seriously and then not so seriously. And I said, "Oh man, I gotta hang out with this brother."
So hang out. You decided to move to Waco.
Well, yeah, that's what happened.
What in the world brought you to Waco?
Oh my goodness. Well, there was a search, and I said, let me apply. There was a search for a post. And I was living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. I was on leave from Seattle Pacific University. And at that time, Bob and I, we were working on the big book project we'll talk about later. But it just seemed like a natural kind of movement toward the types of things that I was looking forward to doing. I wanted to compose more music. I wanted to write more text, and I wanted to teach, and I wanted to pass on this information to the next generation. I had just closed out my time too at Trevecca University,
yes,
where I was a director of the African American Worship Studies program, where we developed a master's degree, online master's degree in African American Worship Studies. And that had been going pretty well, but I was thinking about, okay, God, what do you want me to do? And then this popped up, and I applied and went through the process, and now I'm here at Baylor.
Here you are, Pritchard Chair.
It's
inaugural Pritchard Chair.
Yes.
Of the study of Black church worship.
Yep. It's been amazing. It's been an amazing run, and it's a wonderful opportunity because I get to work with you, Todd, and Truett. I get to work with the School of Music, get to work with the library, and work with the wonderful faculty here. It is so dynamic.
Yes.
The Gospel Archives, which Bob is principal founder in, and there's so much incredible work that's before us and wonderful things that we're unearthing right now.
So let's talk a bit about the Black Gospel Archives. Bob was 35 years teaching at Baylor, 25 years full-time. His career is stunning. 25 books, including one that we're going to talk about in just a bit.
Yeah. But maybe we will.
Well, we're going to get there. This is just a run-up. It's a teaser. Hang in there, you all. Bob, you did so much during your time at Baylor, master teacher, professor of journalism, but one of your signature marks, arguably the signature mark, is that which you have done with that which is now known as the Black Gospel Archives. Talk about the way that this was built from kind of the ground up.
I had just finished a book titled People Get Ready, A New History of Black Gospel Music. And instead of being thrilled, I did get tenure with that book, by the way. I was really sad because a lot of the music I was writing about, Todd, I couldn't find. It was simply unavailable. And I'd talked to a few collectors of Black Gospel vinyl, and we came up with a figure that 75% of gospel music from the golden age of gospel music, say 1945, 1975, is lost in landfills, in litigation, anything you can imagine. And I was depressed over that because I loved this music so much. I'd been gospel music editor for Billboard magazine in New York for 15 years. And I'd grown up with this music. It was my foundational music. So in my arrogance, I sat down and wrote an editorial and sent it to the New York By God Times, which gets 800 unsolicited editorial submissions every week. And they ran it on Valentine's Day, 2005, the day of the Grammys, where Kanye won with Jesus Walks, coincidentally. And it said, if we let this music, this foundational music of all of American popular music, die, then future generations are going to judge us very harshly. And the next morning, my phone blew up with calls, and one of which was from a gentleman in New York City, Mr. Charles Royce, a very successful investor. And he had done in the overnight hours an investigation into me and into Baylor. And he said, you figure out how to save it, and I'll pay for it. So I immediately walked across the parking lot to the Baylor libraries. Now, Todd, you understand this, but not all your listeners will. Libraries are like Switzerland in the United Nations. They're the only entity that everybody trusts in all of our different silos.
Yeah, that's right.
And the librarians are all can-do people.
Yes.
And one of the gentlemen who was there at the time is still here, Darryl Sturr.
Yes.
And librarians listened to my whole spiel, which I didn't know what I was talking about, and they said, we can do this. And we spent months coming up with what we thought was the finest digitization lab. If we could get this final, we could preserve it.
Yeah.
And from that small beginning, now is the largest initiative to identify, acquire, digitize, and someday make widely accessible the gospel music of the golden age. The last time I checked, Stephen, I think we're in the neighborhood of 50,000 items digitized. We have more gospel music than the Library of Congress, and we provide the gospel music for the National Museum of African American History and Culture, NPR, PBS, anybody who asks, we have the database, and it has become the center of the universe for gospel music studies.
Stunning. And now it's also grown to include gospel preaching.
Yep.
And so when you come to Baylor, on the bottom floor of Moody Memorial Library, there is sufficient, maybe not sufficient, but significant space set aside for the Black Gospel collection. And at the foundation of the collection is the Black Gospel Music Archives.
That's correct. And you always, like you said, want to leave something wherever you go. And you always fear when you retire that what you have done may or may not be. And I feel eternally blessed that when I left, Baylor went through the search with the support of Ella Pritchard and the Pritchard Foundation to create somebody who would work directly with this to promote and preserve the Black Gospel Archive, because I actually had a day job on those previous 15 years teaching in the journalism department.
Yeah, they let you teach, didn't they?
And I inexplicably and could never give it the full attention I wanted, nor did I have all the expertise. I'm just an old journalist. And Stephen was God sent in that way with his heart for this music and its promotion and preservation.
And his capacity to sing it and to cause other people to want to sing it. So, Maestro, tell us about how you're building on the foundation that Bob put in place. Talk to us about this new Lilly grant.
Well, we just received a $2.48 million Lilly grant to expand the archives. We want to expand its footprint here at Baylor University. I'm hoping 1,000 square feet at least,
Yes.
and to create a classroom situation. Also to create a performance venue so we can actually have like tiny desk concerts with gospel artists coming again, sharing their history, talking about it, and then performing old and then performing something new. So the music, it's not just on vinyl, but we want the music to jump out off the vinyl, and we want it to be a transformative space. So I'm around to help guide us with the performativity of the old and of the new. I call it the ancient future zone, if you will. And what the other thing I'm excited about is the fact that we get to take this show on the road. We're going to Detroit, we're going to Chicago, we're going to sponsor some massive symposium concerts with gospel artists in those regions and getting them to come back and come to Waco. And then you got some old LPs, you got some old vinyl, you got some old octavos. We'll bring those here. Let's digitize them. Building relationships, expanding our partnerships, and expanding our collaborations. And who knows what's going to be next. I'm very excited about it. And then finally, our students. Our students get to engage with this material. They're writing theses. They're starting to think about African American sacred music scholarship. Not just the performativity of it as in music, but the theology of it, the history, and the aesthetics of it. I'm very excited about it.
Well, as it happens, you've been practicing what you're preaching because you all have been engaged in a significant piece of scholarship that will come out at the end of March with Oxford University Press, an investigation into the music and ministry of, wait for it, Andre Crouch. So you have shared with us how this book was birthed. Share with us how this book then came to be.
Well, once Stephen signed on, I began a paper research, trying to find what was out there. Newspaper articles, books, magazines. And I was disappointed in one aspect of it because there was very, very little. This is an artist who, if there is a mythical Mount Rushmore of gospel artists, is on there with Mahalia Jackson and Thomas Dorsey. And yet there had been one few 100-page book written in 1974 that he helped on, and that was all.
Well, that's not enough, is it?
It wasn't, and here's the guy that influenced all gospel music going forward. So I spent a couple years that, and then Stephen, I'll let him speak on his side, had grown up with this music to the degree he could tell me chapter and verse, which album and what. And as a composer and as a theologian, he had gotten a seminary degree a few years ago. We said, let's do it a dual approach. I'll focus on the history and getting all of that in chronological order. Stephen will focus on, but not exclusively, on each individual song and do this from Andre's earliest to his last thing so we can tell the story both from a spatial, chronological, historical, as well as theological and compositional point. No other book had tried to attempt that. But then there are very few books that had 2 full-time people working on them for more than 10 years.
Wow.
It's been 10 years, And the other thing that's inserted and imported in this incredible artifact is just the hand of God, are these testimonies are these interviews. Bill Maxwell was the first people we interviewed. We went out to California and met him and Perry Morgan. And we knew we were onto something then. Just hearing Bill share the life. He has an incredible photographical memory and sonic memory. And these things were coming back. We'd ask him a question and brrr, he would just spill it out. And so to document that, we interviewed Marvin Winans. We interviewed just about every living musician that played with Andre Crouch. You know, we one of the more touching interviews, I remember Abe Laborio, the bass player, Abe Laborio, and he was just talking about the spirituality and the bibliocentric mindset that Crouch had in his writings. So we have all of these jewels and gems in this incredible treasury that we got a chance to steward it and hopefully, you know, passed on to the next generation. And the other thing that's really interesting is the fact that Jesus pops up so much in this text.
Absolutely. And we did well over 200 interviews, most of them by Zoom.
Yes.
We got into the pandemic and realized, having done a lot of books before that, when I would do books that involved Los Angeles, I could maybe get 2 interviews if I was lucky, if they were on within 5 miles of each other with traffic. But with the pandemic, not only could we do multiple ones in a day, people who didn't know us and didn't have a relationship with us might be okay about talking to us on the screen that wouldn't have let an old fat white guy in their house. So these 200 Zoom interviews, Stephen and I built a rapport and a relationship along the way, and very early on we realized that these people were telling us things that they might not have only told a white interviewer or a black interviewer.
Right.
And with Andre, his greatest collaborator and best friend, Bill Maxwell, was a white guy who was his drummer and producer. And the greatest work that Andre created was during that period, the two of them worked together. And the dynamic of Stephen and I made this book more joyful, more exciting, more deeper than anything I'd ever done.
I do think it's this idea of a multifaceted kaleidoscope that we were able to talk about things.
Yes.
He had this journalistic perspective. Then I brought in some theology, and then, here's the music. And then he said, but look, he couldn't have done that because look at this date. Oh, so we were actually watching Andre. It's like you're hitting the rewind button, and we were watching his artistic development. We saw his ministry thrive. And Andre had always been consistent because his ministry was always about people. He never swayed from that.
We decided early to do the book chronologically and research it chronologically, which I'd never done before. So the book and Andre's genius unfolded to us as we worked through it. And it helped us to make connections that I'm not sure
we would not,
had otherwise. The things we went back and found, with the help of some of these collectors, pieces of music that the family didn't even have, things that he had recorded himself. A number of pieces that we wrote about from the only known copy of that piece of vinyl, and to watch his transformation and growth on the things that he most mattered to him: ecumenicalism, evangelism, and eschatology, the 3 E's. And
people.
Now that'll actually preach.
Yes, it would. Well, I think this artifact preaches.
Yeah.
Because Andre did. His life preached.
Yeah.
His music preaches still. And we want the next generation to pay attention to this music. We were in awe of the fact that some young kids would sing some of his songs and they had no idea who Andre was.
Yeah, they didn't know that he wrote Soon and Very Soon.
Or
They didn't know that he'd written The Blood Will Never Lose Its Power. Okay, so do this for us. Take us on a tour of the book and then tell us why people should take the advice of the young girl in the garden to Augustine, take up and read. All right? So take us on a tour of the book and tell us why people should buy the book, read the book, digest the book, and in Revelation's terms, eat the book.
Eat the book.
Yeah.
Well, I'll start. It begins with humble beginnings.
Yeah.
California was the place to be. And all of this music came out of that and migrated east. So it takes us through that journey, and it takes us through his early compositional development and looking at the light years. And I'm going to pitch it to you.
Stephen uses the word Mozartian when he talks about Andre's talent. Andre's miraculous talent where had never played an instrument, had shown no musical interest. His father has started a storefront church and said, this is a Church of God in Christ church. We're all about music. Is there anybody here that feels the call to be a musician? And little 9-year-old Andre pops up and says, I do, Daddy. And 2 weeks later, he's playing for the choir and directing the choir on a paper piano his mother had found that he could practice on, something they rolled out on the dining room table. And then the other miraculous thing, other than his life in many ways, is the story how he and the great Billy Preston and his twin sister Sandra were at the great James Cleveland's house. And in the backyard, there's a barbecue going on. And little Andre, he's probably 15, 16 at the time, looks out there, says, I wish God would give me the ability to write songs too. And he watches Cleveland pour barbecue sauce on some ribs, and all of a sudden, and this story is consistent through 50 years of telling from Sandra, Andre, and Billy Preston, he shrieks, the blood. And he runs back into the living room where Cleveland has a grand piano and writes, the blood will never lose its power, and then throws it away.
Puts it on these notes and throws away, and then his sister
retrieves it and says, no, I think it's pretty good, Andre. And Billy Preston plays it from Andre's theme.
Yeah.
And before the first chorus is over, everybody outside at this party has come crowded around the piano, and they're all crying and singing. And all of Andre's songs, almost all that we could verify, come through some kind of spirit touch like that. He doesn't send with pencil and paper and agonize over staff. He writes many of his songs in real time, in a concert, ideas, songs, lyrics, something comes up, and the band jumps in amazingly. And then over the next concert and the next concert, and by the end of 3 concerts, all of a sudden we have Take Me Back or Through It All or any of these songs that are still in hymnals today.
Absolutely astonishing. Okay. Why Oxford University Press? You all could have had any press in the world that would take up this book. Why OUP?
Well, it's really considered the Cadillac of publishing.
It's the gold standard.
And it's the gold standard. And we had other offers, and we were able to sit back and say, no, let's go with Oxford. And they're releasing it in 2 divisions.
Yeah.
In the general readership and in the academic lane as well.
Yeah.
And so there are more resources put into the text. And right now, I think they're marketing it in almost 10, 15 countries right now as we speak, before the book's coming out.
Astonishing. I've seen the cover. It's amazing. You all have seen the galleys.
Yeah.
And when do you anticipate getting your author's copies?
I hope they current cover date of March 31st, and then 3-4 months later for the academic, which I assume it's going to be the same publisher.
Yeah.
And then Oxford has a great reputation of supporting its authors, and we have a story to tell. and Stephen can sing and play and compose, and I can do a soft shoe, and we're going to take this show on the road.
You're going to hit the road, Jack. So, one final question about the book, and then a final question for our conversation. So, if a person cracks it open, they're going to encounter how many pages? Are there any pictures to break it up?
Well, there are pictures. We've got pictures. I don't want to actually say what the pictures are, but they are going to be absolutely floored. There's color pictures in black and white.
Wonderful.
But when they open it, they're gonna see. Oh, wait a minute! I didn't know he wrote that song. Then hopefully they go back and listen to it. Like, oh, it's almost like as a listener's guide as well.
Got it.
That people will be able to open the book and listen to.
And if they're a minutia freak like I am, who spent much of my misspent childhood looking at baseball batting averages and LPs looking at who played on what song, we tracked down all of these A-list musicians who took much less money because they wanted to play with Andre. And we tracked down every one of those that we could, over 200 Zoom interviews alone. And one of the great things about it was many of the Church of God in Christ, like unfortunately many denominations, doesn't promote women in the pulpit. But inspired by Andre and Sandra, many of the backup singers who went on to work with Michael Jackson and Madonna, and everybody from Elvis to Elton John, Paul Simon, after they left Andre, they wanted to found churches of their own, Cogent churches of their own. And they're all in their 80s by this point, and they're all still gorgeous. And they loved Andre so much. So many of these photos and artifacts, they wanted us to be able to put in the book. And then at the end of these long, emotional, we'll both be in tears interviews, they would say, Brother Darden, Brother Newby, can I? Or often young man, which I liked a lot. Can we pray for this book? And they would put their hands on the screen, the Zoom screen, and say, Dear God, give them the words, give them the power to be able to tell this story and take this message. And Steve and I kept every one of those prayers because they inspired us through the long couple years of the pandemic and the fight to organize hundreds of thousands of words, because the book ended up being 150,000 words, as big as they could make it.
About 400 pages, a little over 400.
Yeah. So roll your sleeves up. Get the nuts out and dig in. So one final question. I told you I was only going to ask you one more about the book. I'm going to ask you one more about the book and then a final. So it's a labor of love, obviously. A decade of your lives working on this book. So why Andre and why now?
I've been in ministry for about 50 years. Andre has always been that guiding light for me with regard to musical excellence and exceptionality. It's just been that. And when I look at what artists are doing today, I can see an extension of the African-American musical tradition. I can see a direct line going to what happened on the West Coast with Andre Crouch.
All right.
Whether that's Kirk Franklin, Yolanda Adams, to Jonathan Reynolds, there are these through lines that are connected to Andre.
All right. Yeah. Bob?
My father got promoted to captain in the United States Air Force in 1960. So I'm 6 years old. And he gets a pump in pay, and he goes out and buys our first ever little rinky-dink hi-fi player, and still has enough money left over to buy 3 LPs. Buys a Perry Como LP for my mom, a album of music movie themes by Mantovani, and Mahalia Jackson's Christmas album with the 6.5-minute version of Silent Night. And my sister, who's younger than I am, has vivid memories of me, and I'm deaf in my right ear from birth. At age very young, holding the little tiny speakers to my good ear and listening to Mahalia Jackson and playing it over and over again. So gospel music has been in my DNA, and the first artist that I remember being my artist was Andre Crouch. And when I came to Baylor in 1972, having lived around the world, one of the first concerts at Baylor University in Waco Hall was Andre Crouch and the Disciples
My goodness.
in the spring of 1973. So it was the first concert, gospel concert I had seen. I had heard gospel, but never seen it. And it's kind of embarrassing now, but I was so enthralled by it sitting on that second balcony back there that I was worried that the second coming would come before Andre finished the concert. Hand to God. I remember that thought vividly. And
Soon
Andre,
and very soon we're going to see the king, but let him finish first.
or take the rest of them. But
Well, what's so beautiful about this is a project born of friendship, born of admiration for the person who is being treated, and born of significant scholarship that has been devoted to not only this friendship, but someone who you have grown to admire from your earliest time. So since one good trick or turn deserves another, I got to ask you this question. So we're greedy. What's next? we're gonna get Andre and we're gonna work through it, and then what can we anticipate that's gonna come out of this next season from Darden and Newby, or from Darden or Newby?
Well, I'll say this first. I'm finishing up my symphony number 2. And that is entitled Ode to Andre. And so we're looking at
How about that?
Looking at a record company. Parma is considering it. Either London or the Prague Symphony is going to record it this summer. So looking at that, and then there's a gospel history text out of Detroit. The narrative out of Detroit is so important. Not much has been done, and I want to call it something like the gospel sound from Motown. You know that.
Yeah.
Something like that. Because there was a lot of connections with the Motown musicians,
Right.
and the story of gospel in Detroit. And then we've got a couple other things up.
I gather you do. Bob.
it is so early in the process, I hesitate to even mention it. But once I speak it out into the universe,
Okay. I think.
then we're committed. We have both enjoyed some of the recent spate of musical biographies on stage. And working with Andre so intimately and being able to dissect the songs, see that not only are many of the albums an actual liturgy, but on the broad macro that this is the story of his life. And to be fair, this is not a hagiography. Andre had his flaws, and we covered those. It's not the focus, but it impacts the music. So we, in his ministry, we have to address those, and do, in a redemptive way, I hope. But at the same time, we both kept hearing these are not only the seasons of his life, but these are the musical highs and lows of his life. Stephen has already done musical theater on the lives of Duke Ellington and Nina Simone. And I've taught screenplay for decades, and so together trying to perhaps put together a musical theater tribute, we've roughed out a pretty good narrative, the book, and we've gotten the songs identified, and where we both can steal time to keep building this thing. And as word is slipped out, probably because I have a big mouth, other people outside our circle have taken notice and have reached out to us. So we don't know what that means at this point, but it will be the next step.
Well, it means to stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
And thank you all for tuning in to one of the most remarkable Todd Talks we've had. So grateful, Bob. So grateful, Stephen. And don't forget, not only buy Andre Crouch and read it, but find his tunes and listen to it, and you will know the spirit that inspired this remarkable scholarship. Thanks for tuning in.